Mark's fingers drummed nervously against his jeans as he stood outside Raven's Edge Music Academy, a weathered Gibson Les Paul case slung across his shoulder. At 22, he felt slightly ridiculous starting guitar lessons, but after years of air guitaring to his favorite metal bands in his bedroom, he'd finally decided it was time to learn the real thing. The modest music school sat wedged between a vintage bookstore and a tattoo parlor in the artsy district downtown, its windows adorned with faded band stickers and concert posters. The autumn wind whipped through his dark hair as he pushed open the glass door, a bell chiming his arrival. The interior smelled of old wood, amp tubes, and something faintly floral that reminded him of— No, it couldn't be. That was the same perfume his mysterious neighbor wore, the one he'd been stealing glances at for months but had never worked up the courage to talk to. "You must be Mark," a familiar voice called from behind the front counter. Mark's heart nearly stopped. Standing there, her platinum blonde hair streaked with black underneath, was his neighbor. She wore a fitted black band t-shirt that hugged her curves perfectly, distressed jeans that showcased her long legs, and combat boots that somehow made her even more striking. Dark eyeliner accentuated her piercing green eyes, and silver jewelry caught the light as she moved. This was definitely the woman who lived 2 doors down from his apartment, the one who received packages for obscure metal bands and whose apartment sometimes vibrated with the deep thrum of bass lines late into the night. Yeah, that's me," he managed, trying to keep his voice steady. "You're my guitar instructor?" A small smile played at the corners of her glossy black lips. "Guilty. I'm Raven. Though I guess we're neighbors, aren't we? Apartment 4B. She extended a perfectly manicured hand with black nail polish, and when their fingers touched, Mark felt electricity that had nothing to do with the guitars hanging on the walls around them. 4D, he confirmed, his hand lingering in hers perhaps a moment too long. "I had no idea you taught here. I mean, I knew you were into music, but—" He gestured vaguely, still processing this surreal turn of events. Raven's laugh was like warm honey mixed with whiskey, smooth and intoxicating. "What gave it away? The Bathory shirt or the fact that my amp sometimes rattles the building?" She grabbed a guitar from the wall display, her movements graceful and confident. "Come on, let's head to Studio 3. We can get better acquainted while I figure out what you already know." Following her down a narrow hallway lined with sound-dampening foam, Mark tried not to stare at the way her hips swayed or how her blonde hair cascaded over her shoulders. The studio was intimate, barely large enough for 2 chairs, a small amp, and a music stand. Posters of metal legends covered the walls: Dio, Black Sabbath, Iron Maiden, and several bands Mark didn't recognize, but that looked appropriately dark and atmospheric. "So," Raven said, settling into her chair with fluid grace, "what made you finally decide to learn? And don't say, to meet chicks, because I've heard that one 1,000 times." She plugged her guitar into the amp, and even the simple action seemed effortlessly cool. Mark felt his cheeks warm. "Honestly? I've been playing air guitar to metal songs since I was 12. My roommate finally got tired of my performances and bought me actual lessons as a birthday gift. Said it was either this or he was moving out." He opened his case, revealing a basic but decent electric guitar. "I figured if I'm going to embarrass myself, might as well do it properly." "Metal, huh?" Raven's eyes lit up with genuine interest. "What bands?" "Metallica, obviously. Some Slayer, Iron Maiden, Black Sabbath. I've been getting into some of the newer stuff too, Arch Enemy, Amon Amarth." Mark felt more confident talking about music than he had about anything else since walking in. Raven nodded approvingly. "Good taste. Angela Gasso is a goddess, and Johann Hegg's vocals could summon the dead." She strummed a chord that resonated deep in Mark's chest. "Let's see what you can do with that guitar of yours. Ever hold one before?" "A few times. My cousin let me mess around with his acoustic when we were kids." Mark lifted his guitar, immediately fumbling with the strap. "Here, let me help." Raven stood and moved behind him, her body heat radiating against his back as she adjusted the strap properly. Her fingers brushed his neck as she positioned the guitar, and Mark caught another whiff of that intoxicating perfume, something dark and mysterious with hints of vanilla and sandalwood. There. Now you won't drop it mid-solo and destroy your foot. The next hour passed in a blur of basic chord progressions, finger positioning, and Mark trying desperately not to be distracted by his instructor's proximity. Raven was patient but demanding, correcting his technique with gentle touches that sent shivers through him. When she demonstrated a particularly complex passage, her fingers dancing across the frets with practiced precision, Mark found himself mesmerized by her skill and grace. "Not bad for a first lesson," she said as they packed up their instruments. "You've got good rhythm instincts. With practice, you might actually be able to play something recognizable within a few months." Her teasing tone was playful rather than mean. "Thanks, I think." Mark secured his guitar in its case, reluctant for the lesson to end. "Same time next week?" "Actually," Raven paused, seeming to consider something. "I was thinking, would you be interested in some additional practice? I mean, outside of formal lessons. I've got a full setup at my place, and it might help to practice in a more relaxed environment." Mark's heart raced. Was she asking what he thought she was asking? "That sounds great. I mean, if you don't mind dealing with my terrible playing at close range. Trust me, I've heard worse. Besides," she shouldered her guitar case with practiced ease, "neighbors should look out for each other, right?" Walking back to their apartment building together felt surreal. Mark learned that Raven had been teaching guitar for 3 years while pursuing her master's degree in music theory. She performed with a local metal band called Midnight Requiem on weekends and had actually opened for some fairly well-known acts that toured through the area. "You should come see us play sometime," she said as they climbed the stairs to their floor. "We're doing a show next Friday at the Underground. It's a small venue, but the acoustics are incredible." "I'd love to." Mark meant it. He'd been curious about the local metal scene, but had always felt too intimidated to venture out alone. They paused at the landing between their doors, the moment stretching between them like a held guitar note. In the dim hallway light, Raven looked even more striking, shadows playing across her angular features. "I had fun today," she said softly. "It's nice to meet someone who actually appreciates real music instead of whatever manufactured garbage they play on the radio." "Yeah, me too. I mean, the lesson was great. And getting to know you." Mark trailed off, not sure how to finish without sounding like a complete idiot. Raven stepped closer, close enough that he could see the silver flecks in her green eyes. "Mark." "Yeah." "Don't practice too hard before next week. I don't want you developing bad habits." Her smile was enigmatic as she unlocked her door. "But maybe you could come by Wednesday evening? For that informal practice session." Mark nodded, not trusting his voice. As Raven disappeared into her apartment, he stood in the hallway for a full minute, replaying every moment of the past hour and wondering if he was dreaming. The next few days crawled by with excruciating slowness. Mark found himself hyper-aware of every sound from Raven's apartment, the distant hum of her amp, the muffled strains of music he couldn't quite identify, her footsteps in the hallway. He practiced obsessively, determined not to embarrass himself further, though his fingers still felt clumsy and uncertain on the strings. Wednesday evening arrived with autumn rain drumming against the windows. Mark stood outside Raven's door at exactly 7 o'clock, guitar case in hand, trying to calm his nerves. The door opened before he could knock. "Perfect timing," Raven said, and Mark's breath caught. She'd traded her usual band T-shirt for a deep purple top that clung to her curves and made her eyes seem even more intense. Her blonde hair fell in loose waves around her shoulders, and the scent of her perfume mixed with something warm and spicy. She'd been cooking. "I hope you're hungry," she continued, stepping aside to let him enter. "I made way too much chili, and it seemed rude not to offer to share." Mark's apartment was a typical bachelor pad. Functional furniture, minimal decoration, takeout containers that should have been thrown away days ago. Raven's place was a revelation. The walls were painted deep jewel tones and covered with concert posters, vintage album covers, and what looked like original artwork. Candles flickered on every surface, casting dancing shadows that made the space feel mysterious and intimate. A high-end sound system dominated one corner, flanked by towers of vinyl records and CDs. Her guitar setup occupied the opposite corner. Multiple instruments hanging on stands, a serious-looking amp, and various pedals and effects boxes arranged with military precision. "This is incredible," Mark said, genuinely awed. "It's like a temple to music." "Music is religion," Raven replied, heading toward the kitchen. "Everything else is just noise." "Beer." They ate dinner sitting cross-legged on her plush rug, bowls of surprisingly delicious chili balanced between them, while Raven's carefully curated playlist provided the soundtrack. She'd started with some melodic metal that Mark recognized, gradually introducing him to bands he'd never heard but found himself enjoying. Her knowledge was encyclopedic. She could tell stories about nearly every band that came up, often including personal anecdotes from shows she'd attended or musicians she'd met. "Okay, enough procrastination," Raven said as she collected their empty bowls. "Time to see if you actually practiced or if you spent the week air guitaring in your underwear." Mark's cheeks reddened. "How did you know about the underwear?" Raven's laugh was rich and genuine. "Lucky guess. Come on, let's see what you've got." She handed him one of her guitars, a sleek black instrument that felt different from his own, somehow more responsive and alive in his hands. When she plugged it into her amp and adjusted the settings, the sound that emerged was fuller and more powerful than anything Mark had produced before. "Try that basic progression I taught you," she instructed, settling onto the couch with her own guitar. Mark fumbled through the chords, his nervousness making his fingers clumsy. But gradually, as Raven played along with him, providing a bass line that made his simple chords sound like actual music, he began to relax. When he finally managed to play through the entire progression without mistakes, she smiled with genuine pride. "See? You're getting it. Now try this." She launched into a more complex riff, her fingers moving with fluid precision. Mark watched, mesmerized, as she lost herself in the music. Her eyes closed, her body moving slightly with the rhythm, completely absorbed in the sound she was creating. When the last note faded, she opened her eyes to find him staring. "What?" "Nothing. You're really good. Like, really good. Why aren't you touring with some major band instead of giving lessons to hopeless cases like me?" Raven's expression grew thoughtful. "I love performing, don't get me wrong. But teaching, there's something special about watching someone discover they can create music. That moment when it clicks, when you stop thinking about your fingers and just feel the rhythm." She shrugged, suddenly looking vulnerable. "Most people don't understand that music isn't just entertainment. It's expression, emotion, a way of connecting with something bigger than yourself." Mark felt something shift between them, a deeper understanding that went beyond physical attraction. "I think I'm starting to get that. When you were playing just now, it was like watching someone speak a language I've always wanted to learn." They continued practicing for another hour, Raven gradually introducing more complex techniques. She was an excellent teacher, patient but challenging, and Mark found himself improving faster than he'd thought possible. More importantly, he felt comfortable with her in a way that surprised him. Despite her intimidating appearance and obvious expertise, she made him feel like his efforts mattered, like his fumbling attempts at making music were worth her time and attention. "I should probably head back," he said reluctantly as the evening wound down. "Early day tomorrow." "Of course." Raven walked him to the door, and again they found themselves in that charged moment of transition. "Mark." "Yeah." "Friday night. The show at the Underground. You should really come. I'd like you to see what we can do with a full band." "I'll be there," he promised. Friday night, the underground was packed with leather, denim, and enough black clothing to outfit a small army. Mark felt underdressed in his simple jeans and button-down shirt, but the crowd was more welcoming than he'd expected. The venue was small and intimate, with a low stage that put the performers almost at eye level with the audience. When Midnight Requiem took the stage, Mark's breath caught. Raven had transformed completely. Gone was the approachable teacher from their lessons. In her place stood a metal goddess. She wore tight black leather pants that showcased her long legs, a corset-style top that emphasized her curves, and knee-high boots that added to her already impressive height. Her makeup was more dramatic, her blonde hair teased and wild. But it was the confidence radiating from her that was most striking. She commanded the stage like she was born to it. The band launched into their first song, and Mark was immediately blown away. Raven's guitar work was intricate and powerful, her solos soaring over the rhythm section with technical precision and emotional depth. But more than her skill, it was her stage presence that captivated him. She moved with fluid grace, her body expressing the music as much as her instrument. When she stepped forward for a particularly complex solo, the crowd erupted in appreciation. Between songs, she scanned the audience and her eyes found his. For a moment, her performer's mask slipped, and she gave him a small, genuine smile that made his heart race. Then she was back in character, introducing the next song with a sultry growl that sent shivers through the crowd. After the show, Mark waited near the bar while the band packed up their equipment. Other audience members approached Raven, praising her performance, and Mark felt a stab of something that might have been jealousy watching her interact with obvious admirers. But when she finally made her way over to him, her face lit up with genuine pleasure. "You came," she said, and despite the crowd around them, it felt like an intimate moment. "You were incredible," Mark replied, meaning every word. "I mean, I knew you were good from our lessons, but that was, wow." Raven's cheeks flushed slightly under her stage makeup. "Thanks. It felt good tonight. The crowd was really into it." She paused, seeming to consider something. "Want to get some air? It's pretty stuffy in here." They stepped outside into the cool night air, the sounds of the city replacing the residual ringing in their ears. Raven had thrown on a leather jacket but was still dressed in her stage outfit, and Mark found it difficult to concentrate on conversation. "So what did you think?" "Honestly?" she asked, leaning against the brick wall of the club. "Honestly? I think you're wasting your talents giving lessons to amateurs like me. You should be headlining festivals, not playing dive bars." Mark moved closer, drawn by something he couldn't name. "Maybe someday. But right now, this is where I want to be." She looked up at him, and in the dim light from the street lamps, her green eyes seemed to glow. "Teaching you, performing with the band, building something real instead of chasing some impossible dream." "It doesn't seem impossible when I watch you play," Mark said softly. They were standing close now, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her body despite the cool air. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility and unspoken desire. Mark found himself leaning closer, drawn by the intensity of her gaze and the slight parting of her lips. "Mark," she whispered, and he could hear both invitation and uncertainty in her voice. "Is this okay?" he asked, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. Instead of answering, she rose on her toes and kissed him. It was electric, passionate, and tasted like the wine she'd been drinking and something uniquely her. Mark's arms came around her, pulling her closer as she melted against him. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I've been wanting to do that since our first lesson," Raven admitted, her usual confidence replaced by something more vulnerable. "Just since then?" Mark smiled, brushing a strand of blonde hair from her face. "I've been wanting to do that since the first time I saw you in the hallway and was too chicken to say hello." She laughed, the sound lighter than her usual sultry chuckle. "We're both idiots, aren't we?" "Probably. But I'm okay with that if you are." Instead of answering, she kissed him again, and Mark decided that starting guitar lessons was definitely the best decision he'd ever made. The following weeks passed in a blur of music and growing intimacy. Their official lessons continued, but now they were supplemented by almost daily practice sessions at Raven's apartment that increasingly involved more kissing than actual guitar playing. Mark was improving rapidly, motivated partly by his desire to impress her and partly by the reward system she'd unconsciously implemented. Every time he mastered a new technique, she'd celebrate with enthusiasm that often led to them forgetting about music entirely. "You're getting dangerous," she told him one evening as he successfully played through a simplified version of a Metallica song. "Pretty soon you won't need a teacher anymore." Mark set down his guitar and pulled her onto his lap where she'd been sitting beside him on the couch. "I'll always need you to teach me something," he murmured against her neck, earning a soft gasp. Their relationship was unlike anything Mark had experienced before. Raven was simultaneously confident and vulnerable, tough and tender. She could command a stage full of metalheads one night and curl up against him the next morning, humming softly while he made breakfast. She challenged him musically and intellectually, introducing him to bands, books, and ideas he'd never encountered. In return, his genuine enthusiasm for learning and his obvious admiration for her talents seemed to boost her confidence in ways she hadn't expected. "I've been thinking," she said one Saturday morning as they lay tangled in her sheets, late autumn sunlight filtering through her dark curtains. "Dangerous pastime," Mark replied, pressing a kiss to her shoulder. "Shut up, I'm being serious." But she was smiling. Midnight Requiem has been asked to open for Crimson Tide when they tour through here next month. It's a big opportunity. Mark propped himself up on his elbow to look at her properly. "That's incredible. Crimson Tide is huge. This could be your break." "Maybe." Raven's expression was thoughtful. "But there's a catch. They want us to join them for the rest of their East Coast tour. 3 weeks on the road, hitting major cities." Mark felt his stomach drop, though he tried to keep his expression neutral. "That sounds like exactly what you've been working toward." "It is." She turned to face him fully. "But it would mean leaving. Leaving my students, leaving you, just when things between us are getting—" She trailed off, seeming to struggle with the words. "Getting what?" Mark asked gently. "Real. Important. I don't know what to call it, but I know I don't want to lose it." Her green eyes searched his face. "What do you think I should do?" Mark's first instinct was to beg her to stay, to tell her that what they had was more important than any touring opportunity. But looking at her face, seeing the conflict between her dreams and her growing feelings for him, he knew he couldn't do that to her. "I think," he said carefully, "that you'd never forgive yourself if you didn't try. And I'd never forgive myself if I was the reason you didn't take the chance." Raven's eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away. "That's not what I wanted you to say." "I know. But it's the truth." Mark pulled her closer, holding her tightly. 3 weeks isn't forever. And if this leads to bigger things, to the career you deserve, then we'll figure it out. What if you meet someone else while I'm gone? Some nice, normal girl who doesn't have more guitars than shoes and doesn't keep vampire hours. Her voice was small, more vulnerable than he'd ever heard it. Mark couldn't help but smile at that. "Raven, you've ruined me for normal girls. Besides," he kissed her forehead, "I'm pretty sure I'm falling in love with you, so your competition is going to have to be pretty spectacular." She was quiet for so long that Mark began to worry he'd said too much, too soon. Then she tilted her head up to look at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears and something that looked like wonder. "Pretty sure?" she whispered. "Okay, completely sure. Absolutely, terrifyingly sure." Mark's heart was racing, but saying the words felt right. "I love you, Raven. All of you, the teacher, the performer, the woman who makes amazing chili and cries during sappy commercials when she thinks no one is looking." I do not cry during commercials, she protested weakly. You absolutely do. And I love that too. She buried her face against his chest, and he felt her shoulders shake slightly. When she finally looked up again, her makeup was smudged and her eyes were red, but she was smiling. I love you too, she said simply. Which makes this decision infinitely more complicated. They spent the rest of the day talking through the implications, the possibilities, the fears and hopes surrounding the tour opportunity. By evening, Raven had decided to take the chance, and Mark had promised to support her decision completely, even though the thought of 3 weeks without her made his chest ache. The band meeting the next week went well. Crimson Tide's management was impressed with Midnight Requiem's demo recordings and stage presence, and the tour details were finalized quickly. Raven would leave in 10 days, returning just before Christmas. Those final 10 days were bittersweet. Mark found himself treasuring every moment. Their practice sessions, lazy mornings in bed, even mundane activities like grocery shopping together took on special significance. Raven seemed torn between excitement about the tour and reluctance to leave what they'd built together. "Promise me something," she said the night before her departure, as they lay in the darkness of her bedroom. "Anything. Keep practicing. I know it sounds silly, but music brought us together, and I want to come back to find you've gotten even better. Maybe by the time I get back, you'll be ready to play something with me. Really play, not just stumble through chord progressions." Mark kissed her temple. "I promise. Any requests for what I should learn?" "Surprise me." The morning of her departure was harder than either of them had anticipated. Mark helped load equipment into the tour van, meeting her bandmates and trying to appear supportive while his heart was breaking. When it came time for final goodbyes, Raven clung to him longer than was probably appropriate in front of her bandmates. 3 weeks, she whispered against his ear. "I'll call every night." 3 weeks, he agreed. "Then you come home and tell me about all your adventures." "Home," she repeated, and something about the way she said it made Mark's chest tight with both sadness and hope. The first week without Raven was brutal. Mark threw himself into practice with an intensity that probably concerned his neighbors, but it was the only way to keep from missing her so much it physically hurt. He'd been serious about his promise to improve, and with her gone, he had nothing but time to dedicate to learning. True to her word, Raven called every night, usually late after her shows. She'd tell him about the cities, the venues, the crowds, and the other bands they were meeting. Her excitement was infectious, and Mark found himself genuinely happy for her success, even as he counted down the days until her return. "The crowds have been incredible," she told him during their second-week call. "And we've been getting interest from some record labels. Mark, this could really be happening." "That's amazing," he said, and meant it. "I'm so proud of you. I miss you, though," she added quietly. "It's weird, performing for all these people but wishing you were in the audience." 2 more weeks, Mark reminded her. "Then I'll be in your audience whenever you want." By the 3rd week, Mark had made significant progress with his guitar playing. Following online tutorials and drawing on everything Raven had taught him, he'd managed to learn several complete songs. More importantly, he'd begun to understand what she'd meant about music being a language. He could feel the difference between just playing notes and actually expressing something. The night before she was scheduled to return, Raven's call came later than usual, and her voice sounded strange. "Mark, are you sitting down?" His heart stopped. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" "I'm fine, but, God, I don't know how to tell you this." She paused, and Mark could hear voices in the background. "Black Moon Records wants to sign us. It's a real deal, Mark. Not some tiny indie label, but a legitimate contract with tour support and promotion budget and everything we've dreamed of." "That's incredible," Mark said, though something in her tone made him wary. "Why do you sound like someone died?" "Because the contract includes a commitment to tour for the next 18 months. Extensively. We'd be on the road more than we'd be home, and when we were recording, it would probably be in Nashville or L.A., not here. Mark felt the world tilt around him. Oh, I haven't given them an answer yet. I told them I needed to talk to you first. Her voice was small, uncertain. Mark, this is everything I've worked for. But I can't stand the thought of losing you. What do I do? Mark closed his eyes, feeling like he was standing at the edge of a cliff. He could ask her to stay, to turn down the contract and build a life with him instead. Part of him desperately wanted to. But he also knew that if he did, if she chose him over her dreams, she might resent him for it eventually. And he loved her too much to risk that. You take the deal, he said quietly. Mark, no, that's not what I want to hear. It's what you need to hear. Mark's voice was stronger now, more certain. Raven, I love you. And because I love you, I can't let you pass up the opportunity of a lifetime. You'd never forgive yourself, and I'd never forgive myself for being the reason you didn't try. She was crying now. He could hear it in her voice. But what about us? What about what we have? What we have is real, Mark said firmly. And if it's real, it'll survive this. Maybe not intact, maybe not the same, but the love won't just disappear because you're following your dreams. You're breaking up with me, she whispered. No. I'm telling you to go be incredible, and we'll figure out the rest later. Maybe long distance will work, maybe it won't. Maybe you'll meet someone on the road who understands your world better than I do, or maybe I'll realize I can't handle the uncertainty. But maybe, just maybe, we'll find a way to make it work because what we have is worth fighting for. They talked for another hour, both crying, both trying to figure out how to love each other enough to let go. When they finally hung up, Mark sat in the darkness of his apartment, surrounded by the instruments and music sheets that had become such an important part of his life, and wondered if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life or the most loving decision he was capable of. The next morning, Raven texted him, "Took the deal. Coming home tonight to pack and say goodbye properly. I love you." Mark spent the day preparing himself for what might be their last evening together, at least for a long time. When she knocked on his door that evening, she looked exhausted and beautiful and heartbroken. "I have something for you," Mark said after they'd held each other without speaking for several long minutes. He led her to his living room, where he'd set up his guitar and amp. "You said to surprise you with what I'd learned." Mark had spent weeks learning this song, practicing until his fingers could play it without conscious thought. It was one of her favorites, a beautiful, melancholy piece by a band she'd introduced him to, with intricate fingerpicking and emotional depth that had initially seemed far beyond his abilities. As he began to play, Mark watched Raven's face transform from surprise to wonder to something that looked like heartbreak and pride combined. The music filled the space between them, saying everything they couldn't find words for, love and loss and hope and uncertainty all woven together in melody and harmony. When the last note faded, Raven was crying again, but she was also smiling. "That was beautiful," she whispered. "Perfect. I wanted you to know that no matter what happens, you've changed me. You've given me this gift, this way of expressing things I never could before. And I'll keep playing, keep learning, because it makes me feel connected to you even when you're not here." They made love that night with desperate tenderness, trying to memorize each other, to store up enough closeness to last through the uncertain times ahead. In the morning, Mark helped her pack, and they drove to the airport in relative silence, both lost in their own thoughts. At the security checkpoint, they held each other one last time. "I don't know what happens next," Raven said against his chest. "Neither do I. But I know I love you, and I know you're going to be amazing." Mark tilted her chin up to look at him. "And I know that whatever happens, I'm grateful for everything you've given me." "Even if it ends here?" Mark considered this seriously. "Even then. Though I really hope it doesn't." She kissed him one last time, soft and lingering, then pulled away before either of them could change their minds. "I'll call you," she said, walking backward toward security. "I'll answer," he promised. Mark stood at the window watching her plane taxi down the runway until it was just a speck in the gray November sky. Then he drove home, unpacked his guitar, and began to play. 6 months later, Mark was performing his first open mic night at the Underground, the same venue where he'd watched Raven command the stage. He'd continued taking lessons with a new instructor, but more importantly, he'd found his own voice as a musician. The song he performed was one he'd written himself, about love and loss and the way music could bridge impossible distances. In the middle of his performance, he spotted a familiar figure near the back of the crowd. Raven stood against the wall, her platinum blonde hair now cut in a sleek bob, wearing a leather jacket he didn't recognize. She looked older, more confident, transformed by months of touring and professional success. But when their eyes met across the crowded room, her smile was exactly the same. Mark finished his song to enthusiastic applause, but his attention was focused entirely on making his way through the crowd to where she waited. "You came back," he said when he finally reached her. "I'm just passing through. We have a show in Chicago tomorrow night." But she was smiling, and she didn't step away when he moved closer. "How long?" "Just tonight. We leave early in the morning." Mark felt his heart sink and soar simultaneously. One night wasn't much, but it was more than he'd dared hope for. "Your song was beautiful," Raven continued. "You've gotten so much better. I could hear the emotion in every note." "I had a good teacher," Mark replied. "How are you? How's the tour?" "Incredible. Exhausting. Lonely." Her green eyes searched his face. "I've missed you. More than I thought I would, more than I probably should." They spent the night at an all-night diner, talking about everything that had happened in the months since she'd left. Raven told him about the cities she'd seen, the crowd she'd played for, the other musicians she'd met. Mark told her about his continued lessons, his first attempts at songwriting, his new job at a local music store. "Are you happy?" he asked as dawn began to creep across the sky. Raven considered this carefully. "I'm living my dream. The music is everything I hoped it would be, and more. But happy? I don't know. I think maybe happiness was what I had when I was teaching you guitar in my living room and falling asleep in your arms afterward." "You could have that again," Mark said quietly. "Maybe not exactly the same, but something like it." "Could I? Could we?" She looked vulnerable, younger than her years. "Mark, I don't know when I'll be in one place long enough to have a real relationship again. The label is talking about back-to-back tours, international dates. It could be years before I'm home for more than a few days at a time." Mark reached across the table and took her hand. "Then we'll have a few days at a time. And phone calls in between. And emails and texts and whatever else we can manage. It won't be normal or easy, but if we want it badly enough." "You'd really be willing to try that? The uncertainty, the distance, sharing me with the music." Mark thought about the months since she'd left, about the loneliness, but also about the pride he'd felt watching her succeed from afar, about how much richer his life had become because of what she'd taught him about music and passion and following your dreams. "The music isn't competition," he said finally. "It's part of who you are, part of what I love about you. And maybe this is crazy, but I'd rather have a few days with you every few months than a lifetime with someone else." Tears were streaming down Raven's face now, but she was smiling. "You're insane." "Probably. But I'm insane about you." She leaned across the table and kissed him, tasting like coffee and hope and the promise of something that wouldn't be easy but might be worth everything. "I have to catch a plane in 3 hours," she whispered against his lips. "Then we better make them count." 2 years later, Mark stood backstage at Madison Square Garden, watching Midnight Requiem prepare for what was arguably the biggest show of their career. The band had exploded onto the international scene, their album going platinum and their tours selling out across 3 continents. Raven had become something of a metal icon, her image gracing magazine covers and her guitar solos becoming legendary among fans. But right now, in the chaotic din of roadies and equipment checks, she was just his girlfriend having a pre-show panic attack. "I can't do this," she said, pacing back and forth in the small space. Madison Square Garden. Mark. 20,000 people. What if I mess up? What if my amp cuts out during the solo in Crimson Dawn? What if? Mark caught her hands, stopping her mid-pace. "Hey, look at me." She did, her green eyes wide with terror and excitement. "You've played for crowds twice this size in Europe. You've headlined festivals, jammed with metal legends, had your guitar work featured in movies. You are Raven fucking Morrison, and you belong on that stage." Her breathing steadied slightly. "How are you so calm? I'm about to play the biggest venue of my career, and you're acting like it's just another Tuesday." Mark smiled, pulling her closer. "Because I've seen you play in dingy clubs for 30 people and make it feel like an arena show. Because I've watched you practice the same solo 50 times until it was perfect, then get up on stage and make it sound effortless. Because I know that the moment you step out there and hit that first chord, you're going to transform into the goddess of metal that you are, and those 20,000 people are going to lose their minds." Raven's stage manager appeared at their side. 5 minutes, Raven." She nodded, then turned back to Mark. "I love you." "I love you too. Now go make some noise." Mark watched from the wings as Midnight Requiem took the stage to thunderous applause. The moment Raven stepped into the spotlight, she transformed completely. Gone was the nervous woman from backstage. In her place stood a commanding presence who owned every inch of the massive stage. The show was flawless. Raven's guitar work was technical and emotional, her stage presence magnetic. During her extended solo in Midnight Storm, the crowd was so silent you could have heard a pin drop, 20,000 people hanging on every note. When she finally brought the song to its crashing conclusion, the roar of approval was deafening. After the show, as the band celebrated with champagne and congratulations from industry executives, Mark found himself thinking about how far they'd all come. His own musical journey had continued as well. He now played regularly with a local band and had even filled in for Midnight Requiem's rhythm guitarist a few times when illness or injury struck during tours. "Penny for your thoughts," Raven said, appearing at his side. She'd changed out of her stage outfit into jeans and a vintage band t-shirt, her makeup mostly scrubbed off, but she was still glowing with post-show adrenaline. "Just thinking about that first guitar lesson," Mark replied, wrapping his arms around her. "Did you ever imagine it would lead to this?" "Honestly? No." Raven leaned into him, her body finally relaxing after the intensity of the performance. "I thought you were just another student who'd give up after a few weeks when he realized how much work it actually takes." "Thanks for the vote of confidence. Hey, you proved me wrong. Very, very wrong." She turned in his arms to face him. "Mark, I've been thinking about something." "Yeah." "The label wants us to do another world tour next year. Bigger venues, more cities, probably 8 months on the road." She paused, seeming to gather her courage. "But they also mentioned the possibility of adding a second guitarist for the bigger shows. Someone to handle rhythm while I focus on leads and stage presence." Mark's heart skipped. "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that maybe it's time we stopped spending so much time apart. Maybe it's time for you to see the world with me." Her green eyes were bright with excitement and nervousness. "It would mean leaving your job, your apartment, everything familiar. Life on the road isn't easy. Cramped buses, terrible food, different city every night. But we'd be together." Mark stared at her, processing the magnitude of what she was offering. "You want me to join the band?" "I want you to join me. The band is just the vehicle." Raven's hands came up to cup his face. These past 2 years, trying to maintain a relationship across time zones and continents, grabbing whatever time we could between tours. It's been worth it because I love you. But I'm tired of saying goodbye. I'm tired of falling asleep alone in hotel rooms when I could be falling asleep next to you. What about the other band members? This is their dream too. I've already talked to them. They love you, Mark. You've filled in enough times that they know you can handle it musically, and personally, you're already part of our family. She smiled. Besides, Jake pointed out that having you around might make me less of a perfectionist nightmare during recording sessions. Mark laughed. It was true. Raven's standards were impossibly high, and her bandmates had definitely noticed that she was more relaxed and collaborative when he was around. "This is crazy," he said finally. "The best things usually are." Mark thought about his life as it was, steady, predictable, safe. Then he thought about Raven on stage tonight, commanding 20,000 people with nothing but her talent and passion. He thought about all the places he'd never seen, the music they could create together, the adventure that was waiting if he was brave enough to take it. "When do we start?" he asked. Raven's face lit up like he'd just handed her the world. "Rehearsals begin in January. Tour kicks off in March. Then I guess I better start practicing." She kissed him then, right there in the backstage chaos of Madison Square Garden, surrounded by roadies and equipment and the lingering energy of 20,000 screaming fans. It tasted like possibility and rock and roll and the kind of love that was worth risking everything for. 18 months later, Mark stood on a different stage in a different country, playing rhythm guitar while his girlfriend, now fiancée, melted faces with a solo that would probably end up on greatest of all time lists. The crowd in Hamburg was going absolutely wild, and Mark felt that familiar surge of pride and amazement watching Raven do what she was born to do. The proposal had happened 3 months earlier, in the most unromantic location imaginable, the parking lot of a truck stop somewhere in Nevada at 3 in the morning. They'd been driving through the night to make their next show, and Raven had insisted on taking over driving duties so Mark could sleep. He'd woken up to find her pulled over, staring at the desert sky with tears in her eyes. "What's wrong?" he'd asked, immediately alert. "Nothing's wrong. Everything's perfect." "That's the problem." She'd turned to him, her face illuminated by the dashboard lights. "Mark, I've spent my whole life chasing this dream, convinced that music was the only thing that could ever complete me. And now I have everything I thought I wanted, the career, the recognition, the crowds, the lifestyle. But you know what the best part is?" "What?" "Getting to share it with you. Having you there every night when I come off stage. Waking up next to you in whatever city we're in. Writing songs with you, playing music with you, building this incredible life with you." She'd reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a small velvet box. "So I guess what I'm trying to say is, will you marry me?" Mark had stared at the ring, a simple platinum band with a small diamond that somehow managed to catch and reflect the starlight, and then at the woman who'd turned his entire world upside down with guitar lessons. "Are you seriously proposing to me in a truck stop parking lot at 3 a.m.? he'd asked. "Is that a no?" "That's a hell yes, but I'm definitely telling a different story at our wedding." Now, as Mark played the final chords of their last song of the evening, he caught sight of the ring on Raven's left hand glinting under the stage lights. In 2 weeks, they'd fly back to the States for a brief break before starting work on the band's 3rd album. During that break, they'd planned a small wedding. Just family, close friends, and the rest of Midnight Requiem in the backyard of the house they'd recently bought together. It wasn't the life Mark had imagined for himself when he'd walked into that guitar lesson 3 years ago. It was better, messier, more uncertain, filled with challenges he'd never anticipated. But it was also filled with music and adventure and a love that had grown stronger with every mile they'd traveled together. As the crowd chanted for an encore, Raven grabbed the microphone and stepped forward. "Hamburg, you've been incredible tonight," she shouted, her voice carrying easily over the cheers. "Before we play our final song, I want to introduce you to someone special. This man started as my student, became my bandmate, and somehow convinced me to marry him despite his questionable taste in breakfast cereals. Ladies and gentlemen, my fiancé and the best rhythm guitarist in the business, Mark Chen." The crowd erupted as Mark stepped forward, waving awkwardly. He still wasn't entirely comfortable with the spotlight, but he'd learned to appreciate these moments when Raven wanted to share their story with the world. "We're going to close tonight with a song that's very special to us," Raven continued. "It's about taking chances, about finding love in unexpected places, and about the music that connects all of us. This is Electric Hearts." As they launched into the song, one they'd written together during a late-night session in their hotel room in Prague, Mark found himself thinking about beginnings and endings, about the way life could change completely in the span of a single guitar lesson. The song built to its climactic finale, Raven's lead guitar soaring over the rhythm section while Mark's steady chords provided the foundation. When the last note rang out, the crowd exploded in appreciation, but Mark barely heard them. He was too busy watching Raven, his teacher, his partner, his fiancée, take her bow with the kind of grace and confidence that still took his breath away. Later, as they packed up their equipment and prepared for another late-night drive to the next city, Raven found Mark coiling cables in their usual methodical post-show routine. "So," she said, appearing at his side with 2 bottles of water and that smile that had first captivated him in a dingy music school, "any regrets about letting me teach you guitar?" Mark pretended to consider this seriously. "Well, I did think I was just going to learn a few chords and maybe impress some girls at parties. I had no idea I'd end up touring the world with a metal goddess who steals all my t-shirts and makes me listen to Norwegian death metal at breakfast." "Don't forget the part where you fell hopelessly in love and agreed to spend the rest of your life with said metal goddess," Raven added, moving closer. "Right, that part." Mark set down the cable he'd been coiling and pulled her into his arms. "Yeah, I'm pretty okay with how things turned out." "Just okay?" "Fine. I'm completely, ridiculously, embarrassingly happy with how things turned out. Even the Norwegian death metal at breakfast." Raven laughed, the sound mixing with the distant noise of the venue staff cleaning up around them. In a few hours, they'd be on a bus heading to their next destination, but for now, they had this moment, just the two of them in the aftermath of another successful show, surrounded by the instruments and equipment that had brought them together and carried them around the world. "I love you, Mark Chen," she said, standing on her toes to kiss him. "I love you too, Raven Morrison. Thanks for teaching me how to play. Thanks for being worth teaching." As they finished packing up and headed toward the tour bus, Mark reflected on the unexpected turns his life had taken. He'd signed up for guitar lessons hoping to learn a few songs. Instead, he'd found love, adventure, a career, and a future he never could have imagined. The bus pulled away from the venue, carrying them toward whatever city was next on their journey. Mark settled into his usual seat beside Raven, her head already falling onto his shoulder as the exhaustion of performance caught up with her. Outside the window, the German countryside rolled by in the darkness, but Mark barely noticed. He was too busy planning the guitar arrangement for a new song he'd been working on, too busy thinking about their upcoming wedding, too busy appreciating the extraordinary life that had begun with a simple decision to finally learn how to play the songs he'd been air guitaring to for years. Sometimes the best decisions were the ones that seemed completely ordinary at the time. Sometimes walking into a music school on a whim could change absolutely everything. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, your guitar teacher turned out to be the love of your life who just happened to live 2 doors down from your apartment. As the tour bus carried them through the night toward their next adventure, Mark squeezed Raven's hand and smiled. He'd never been much of a believer in fate, but it was hard to argue with results like these. The music had brought them together, and the music would carry them forward, wherever the road might lead.